welcome to episode number 257 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Brooke May, Bing Bong, John Rohrer, Donna Bowles, Caitlin Huskins, Dalton Rogers, Charlotte B, and Funeral Fairy. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week. Our film review is Nosferatu. Nosferatu was released in 2024. It has 7.7 out of 10 on IMDb and 85% on Rotten Tomatoes. In the 1830s, estate agent Thomas Hutter travels to Transylvania for a fateful meeting with Count Orlok, a prospective client. In his absence, Hutter's new bride Ellen is left under the care of their friends, Friedrich and Anna Harding. Plagued by horrific visions and an increasing sense of dread, Ellen soon encounters an evil force that's far beyond her control. Okay, so I'm going to say this before we start, okay? I may not have the same opinions about this film as you do, and I know there's been a lot of strong opinions about this film, so this is why I'm saying this to start. If I don't have the same opinions as you, I promise you that is okay. It's not that I don't understand the film. It's not that I don't understand gothic horror. I just might have different opinions than you. And you might be wondering, why are you starting with that? Why are you saying that? Well, sometimes when people feel really strongly about a film, and I don't feel the same way, then sometimes they can be a bit mean. And I'm just trying to stop that before it happens. Okay, so we're going to go likes and dislikes. My likes. The yearning. The sense of yearning and eroticism in this film was done so well. Okay, look, it's a film that's full of eroticism. And there's yearning all over the place. Everyone's yearning for everybody. So, I think they did that very well. It is very captivating. It is weirdly sensual at times. It is, like I said, erotic, but horrifying. It is all of those things. And props to them because, it's a lot. It's intense. And from the get-go, there is this brilliant, beautiful use of shadow, which is in keeping with the original 1922 film, and it is so wonderfully done, and it continues throughout the film, this wonderful use of shadow, particularly around Count Orlok, obviously, and it really adds to the atmosphere, right? Not only does it add to the atmosphere, but it removes the Hollywoodization of the horror of the story, which is something that I am vehemently against. As you guys know, I'm against jump scares. I think it's cheap. I think it's really important when you're creating horror to use subtlety, and one of the beautiful things in this film is the use of shadow. And there was also a lot of really quiet reference to death and decay. Like in the early stages of the film, there is this sore, like some sort of a burn, like a bit of rotting flesh on the head of one of the men that is working in this accountancy firm, or in this estate agency rather. And that is just one example that adds just to the gothic wonderfulness of this story. And visually and atmospherically, this film is stunning. It is beautiful. It brought me such joy to watch. There is a moment where Thomas is in Transylvania and he's on his way to Count Orlok's castle, and there is a sequence where the landscape is just divine, and it is so well done, and it is so atmospheric. It's just perfect. There was also this bit in the cargo hold of a ship, I'm not going to give any spoilers, don't worry, that I just thought was a great piece of horror cinema. If you have seen the film, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the film and you are going to go and see it, look out for the bit in the cargo hold of the ship. I just thought it was a really gorgeous, quick piece of horror cinema that it just really worked. And as a very personal aside, right, there is a running theme of the flower lilac in this film, which is my favourite flower, right? And it doesn't come up very often in films, but it came up in this the whole way through. And I was like, oh, love it. It's got this gorgeous thread throughout the film. I mean, it's gorgeous, but also horrifying, as sort of everything is in this film. And I looked it up, and apparently the lilac represents purity and innocence, and purple lilac in particular represents first love, which, let me tell you, it's a great touch for this story. And like I said, this film is a gothic horror, right? So it's a slow burn. You are not going to have big dramatic jump scares, blah, 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 blah. But it is gory. It is visceral. There are moments, there was one moment in particular with a pigeon that actually You know, when you get like your mouth floods with saliva when you feel physically sick and you think, oh, I might actually vom. I had that feeling when I watched that particular moment in the film. I was like, oh God, that is horrendous. I mean, all of it is, you know, relevant. It's in keeping with the theme and the tone of the film. You guys know I don't like unnecessary gore. There are moments as well when Count Orlok, when the vampire is feeding on his victims. Oh, and it is so visceral, and he makes these gulping sounds that gave me the absolute heebie-jeebies, and I thought that was beautifully done. And on the topic of Count Orlok, good Lord, holy moly, what an iteration of the character. So Bill Skarsgård plays Count Orlok, and it was 10 out of 10. I absolutely adored everything about his portrayal, and I thought the choices that they made in terms of his presentation were fantastic. First of all, he's got a big mustache. Loved it. I was like, absolutely, yes, hook it to my veins. He's this big, hulking, decomposing vampire, undead monster with a mustache and a fluffy hat. What is there not to love? I loved his voice. I loved the portrayal of him as this insidious, insipid, decrepit monster that infiltrates dreams and will stop at nothing to get whatever he wants. And I thought that the final images of the film were absolutely beautiful. Horrific, terrible. I need to caveat that by saying, you know, I appreciate they were also horrendous. But I do think the imagery was absolutely stunning. And it's probably the best imagery I've seen in cinema in quite a while. And in terms of dislikes, because I do have dislikes, I did think that it dragged in parts. Do you know what I mean? Fundamentally, I found stretches of it quite boring. That might just be a me thing. You guys know I struggle for long periods of time watching films. But yeah, I just sort of thought, oh, come on, get a move on. Right, I'm tired. I want to see Count Orlok again, right? Let's get some dreams and some scary voice going. There were stretches that I thought were just lagged quite a lot. I wasn't crazy about Lily Rose Depp's character, to be honest, right? I felt that, yes, she did the physical bits well, where she was in those trances and sort of possessed. But I also didn't really care about her peril, because I felt that all we saw of her was her dreaming, being possessed, blah, 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 blah. We actually saw very little of her as a person. And as a result, I was like, oh, get on with it, right? Yeah, okay, fine, yeah, go on. Wasn't that bothered by her. I will also say props to her, because all of the physical bits in the film were done by her, and she worked apparently really hard in order to be able to pull the physical bits off in the film. So, you know, visually also she is stunning. She's a stunning actor to look at. Also thought bits of the dialogue just weren't great. There were monologues here and there which were hammy and sort of made my eyes roll when I was watching them. I was like, oh my God, this is cringy. This is not good dialogue. This is not well written. But it was what it was, right? It's gothic horror. Don't expect big jump scares. It's a slow burn for sure. I don't think it's the type of film that's going to leave you with nightmares. But is Count Orlok a great horror villain? Absolutely. Does it have its flaws? I think it does have its flaws. I don't think it is like this masterpiece that people are saying that it is. But I did still enjoy it. I had a good time. I thought it was good. I also felt like it needed more rats. There were lots of rats in this story, but not enough rat time in the story. I wanted more rat action. Fundamentally, I enjoyed it. Okay? Count Orlok is now my number one. Hear me out. If you know what that means, you know what I mean. So for that reason, I'm giving Nosferatu 4 stars. It was really entertaining. I don't think it was like a masterpiece, but it was good. It's proper gothic horror. It's a slow burn. He's a great villain. You'll enjoy it if you watch it. There are lots of rats. And there's also a lot of Willem Dafoe just doing Willem Dafoe shit. So that's always entertaining. Which brings us to our story today. And we're just going to dive straight in because I feel like this man needs no introduction. So let's get into it. High up in the snow-blown Utstal Alps of northern Italy, there once walked a man. Wrapped up in his furs, his belly full of dried meat and cereals, he carried with him his hunting gear and an axe. 45 years old was a good age to be for a man like him. Already by then he had lived a tough and unforgiving life. His face was weathered and tired. His body was lean and athletic. He had walked many miles and possibly over this same treacherous mountain ridge hundreds of times before. But this time would ultimately be his last. The air was ice cold and sharp in his lungs. 45 years he had trudged these mountains, and his breath still caught in his throat with the crisp glacial air. It is likely that he heard the soft whoosh first. Perhaps he instantly recognized the sound, having been a hunter for his whole life. But whether he did or not, there was no time to change the outcome. He would have probably heard the thud before he actually felt anything. His brain took a fraction of a second to catch up. An arrow lodged into his back, hitting a major artery and giving him only moments left to live. He would not have died immediately. And in those final moments of his 45 years living in the mountains, what did he think about? Did he have a family waiting back down at the foot of the mountain for him? Did he have children? A wife? A partner? Were they wondering where he was, why he had not returned with food as usual? Were any of them with him as he laid down on the rocks and bled out? Or did he die alone? A flash of red against the white landscape. Frozen in time by the wind and the snow, Ötzi the Iceman remained spirited away in the Alps for lifetimes. Countless sunrises and sunsets, countless lives lived and lost, wars and disasters, inventions and discoveries. It was only in 1991, possibly 5 or even 6,000 years since Ötzi last walked the earth, that he saw the light of day again. That summer of 1991 was uncharacteristically warm, and melted ice and snow away from the rock face that hadn't been moved in centuries. Layers of rock and ice were slowly but surely exposed, and Ötzi called somewhere from the deep, beckoning two unsuspecting hikers to his long-forsaken lair. Okay, maybe that makes it sound slightly dramatic. The idea of this long-dead man calling cosmically into the void, tempting the unwitting living into his lair to finally uncover him. But it was strange. These two German hikers just so happened to be walking Ötzi's ridge, and it happened to be exactly the right time, and they happened to look in the exact right place at the exact right moment to spot him. It had been thousands of years since anyone had laid eyes on this mysterious figure, and he must have been a shocking sight to see. Husband and wife, Helmut and Erika Simon, could only see his upper half, but they were experienced enough hikers to know that they were looking at real human remains. Hidden amongst the rocks in an alpine gully, Ötzi was still frozen. His body was now brown and leathery and dried out by the wind and the ice. It lay half covered in the snow. It was a shocking sight to see. His body was wizened. Any hair was long decomposed. Some of his top lip was missing. His left arm was stretched across his body, his bones visible beneath the tightly stretched tautness of his skin. And here's the thing about hiking in this kind of environment. It can be incredibly dangerous, even if you know what you're doing. And there are bodies in the mountains. Helmut and Erika believed that they had found the body of a wayward and unfortunate fellow mountaineer. They headed back down and informed the authorities. When dawn broke the following day, Ötzi's ridge teamed with rescue teams, and the mummy's true nature began to emerge. Of course, the mountain rescue teams believed that they were recovering the body of a mountaineer who had perished in recent years. But when they reached the ridge and finally got a closer look at Ötzi's body, they quickly realised that this was no ordinary recovery mission. They had found something they had never seen before. Something much, much older. Helmut and Erica had unknowingly stumbled upon what was arguably the archaeological find of the century. Because of the wind and the snow, Ötzi is one of the best and well-preserved set of human remains ever recovered, and he had much to teach us. Ötzi had 61 tattoos, which was instrumental in the understanding of how ancient people tattooed and why. His last meal was still in his stomach, which demonstrated what the average diet was like for a man at this time in this area. His copper axe had Tuscan origins. He has helped scientists understand how people moved around Europe, Russia and Asia. Ötzi had a predisposition to cardiovascular diseases, which is helping scientists to understand the genetic prevalence of these diseases as opposed to them being caused simply by lifestyle choices. And Ötzi continues to be studied and analysed. But there was also something darker. Is it also possible that Ötzi was never meant to be disturbed? That he should have been left to rest where he had met his untimely death? News of this incredible discovery travelled like wildfire as everyone waited with bated breath to see what secrets Ötzi would reveal to us. Leading the forensic investigation into Ötzi the Iceman was a man called Rainer Henn, a 64-year-old scientist from Innsbruck University. Rainer was one of the first people in thousands of years to lay his hands on Ötzi, quite literally, as he would often work barehanded while handling Ötzi's remains. And Rainer did so the very first time up on the mountain, as he pulled Ötzi out of the snow and zipped him up into a black body bag. Was it that physical contact that triggered a restless spirit? Did Ötzi take offence to being forcibly removed from his final resting place, only to be manhandled by a constant stream of scientists and archaeologists? Some people thought that maybe what he wanted to do, to be left alone for good, was to send everybody else a definitive and terrifying warning. It was while Rainer was on his way to give a lecture on everything his investigation into Ötzi had told us that it happened. Rainer, a man still full of life and with many years still ahead of him, got into his car and headed off. He was probably brimming with excitement over the information he was about to share with fellow academics, and then the greater world alike. But Rainer was struck down, just like Ötzi had been thousands of years before him. This man that Rainer had dedicated so many hours of his life to studying. Instead of an arrow this time, Rainer's death came by more modern means, although his end was just as swift as Ötzi's had been. Rainer perished in a sudden car accident. His death shocked the academic world, but in the years that followed, people began to question whether there was more to this death than meets the eye. Was it a warning that Ötzi no longer wanted to be disturbed? Studies of the supposedly angered mummy continued, sparking another allegedly ominous and foreboding message from beyond the grave. This time, it was Kurt Fritz, an experienced mountaineer who knew the mountainous region of the Alps very well. He was the one who had brought Rainer Henn to Ötzi up in his ridge in the first place. He was the one who had brought the man who would then touch the remains for the first time in thousands of years with his bare hands and put them into a body bag. Without Kurt's guidance, Ötzi would have potentially remained where he was, safely tucked away and at peace for possibly thousands of more years to come. And it was Kurt that the curse of the Iceman would target next. And just like how Rainer was cut down before he could reveal his findings at his long-awaited lecture, Ötzi would strike Kurt while he still had so much more life to live. Kurt was up in the Alps in his home away from home. He was experienced and hardened by many years of traversing this treacherous landscape. But this time he was going up against forces far greater and far more powerful than himself. Kurt and his party were caught in an avalanche. as they stood watching thousands of tons of snow, rock and ice come hurtling towards them, they dove for cover. Each member of their party miraculously made it to safety. All of them, that is, except for Kurt. Kurt Fitz was the only one to be hit by the wall of snow, and he was the only member of his party that died that day. That had to be it. One death in connection with Ötzi could, after all, be written off as an accident, but would people question Kurt's death as a warning? Perhaps Ötzi wanted to be left alone and wanted the investigation into his death and remains to stop, but stop they did not. As the research and studies continued, it seemed that the spirit of Ötzi was fighting back, and this time, it seemed that the curse thought a little bit harder about its potential target. People were fascinated by Ötzi. People were desperate for every morsel of information about Ötzi, and the academics were desperate to learn and understand everything they could about them. He was a key to unlocking information about our ancestors, about where we came from. Everyone wanted to know more about him. They wanted to know who he was, how he had died, and why. And some say that what happened next was another strike of the curse of the Iceman. Without the media, the press and the newspapers constantly publishing every morsel of information about Ötzi to the general masses, maybe his story would have wilted away and he would finally be afforded some peace. Austrian journalist Rainer Holzel was the only journalist allowed up on the mountain the day that they removed Ötzi from the ice and brought him back down to civilization. The only one who had been there. If anyone was responsible for bringing Ötzi and his story to the general public, it had to be Rainer Holzel. Rainer Holzel was 47 years old when it was said that the curse of the Iceman got him. It had been mere months since the official debut of Rainer's documentary about Ötzi, and it looked like it was only onwards and upwards for Rainer's career from there. Rainer tragically died of a brain tumour before fully being able to utilise the success his documentary had brought him. That was 3 people. The curse of the Iceman had taken down the man who had first moved his body. The curse of the Iceman had killed the man who had led Rainer Hen to him, and the curse of the Iceman had taken the man responsible for making Ötzi and his story an overnight sensation. Surely now any further investigation into the mummy would finally come to an end. The investigation continued, and so did the curse of the Iceman. This time, the curse went back to the source. If Helmut and Erika hadn't stumbled upon Ötzi's resting place and reported it that day, then none of this would have happened. The curse caught Helmut as he disappeared into the Alps once again. As Helmut walked along the same ridge that Ötzi had thousands of years before him, he was caught in a freak blizzard. Through icy winds and dangerous snow, Helmut struggled to keep going and get back to safety. The curse of the Iceman had other plans. In the blinding and bitterly cold blizzard, Helmut fell down a rocky slope and died. His body was found frozen in ice and snow, close to the exact spot where he had discovered Ötzi in the first place. Helmut Simon's death devastated his family, especially his wife Erika. But the curse of the Iceman wasn't done just yet. Within an hour of Helmut's funeral, Dieter Warneck, the man who'd led the mountain rescue team who had gone out to find Helmut in that blizzard, died of a heart attack. After Dieter's sudden and unexpected death, instead of speculating over what secrets Ötzi's remains could tell us, everyone was talking about the curse that Ötzi had placed on the people who had disturbed him. One of the first archaeologists who had studied Ötzi, Konrad Spindler, made a public statement addressing this supposed curse. "It's all media hype," he said. "The next thing you'll be saying is that I'll be next." Konrad Spindler died from a series of complications resulting from multiple sclerosis. Next was molecular archaeologist Tom Loy. It is thanks to Tom Loy that we know anything about Ötzi and the life that he lived all those years ago. One of the initial running theories into Ötzi and his death was that he had died in a hunting accident, but Tom and his research were able to piece the puzzle together. Ötzi had human blood on him when he died, his own, of course, from the arrow that was eventually discovered in his back through later CT scans, but he also had 4 other people's blood on him too. Tom argued that Ötzi had been out hunting with at least one other friend when they came across an enemy tribe. A fight then broke out, where Ötzi stabbed another man and shot at least 2 with one of his arrows. He was somehow able to recover this arrow from both of his kills, and it was later found in his stash of gear and equipment. Then, Tom believes, Ötzi and his friend managed to get away. Blood from Ötzi's companion was found on Ötzi's clothes, suggesting that he was either helping his injured friend get away, or Ötzi himself had already been wounded and was leaning against his injured friend for support. It was after that Ötzi was shot in the back with an arrow, fatally wounding him. It would take mere minutes for Ötzi to bleed out, even if modern-day medicine had been available to him at the time. But it's possible that his friend still tried to save him. Ötzi was found face down in the ridge, one arm splayed out under him like he had been rolled over. His friend possibly tried to remove the arrow from Ötzi's back, but by then it was already too late. Ötzi died as he was, his body left to the elements, possibly as his friend fled from their pursuing enemies. The man who pieced all of this together, Tom Loy, would be found dead in his home at the age of 63, just as he was about to finish his book about Ötzi. That would take the victim count, at least after his own death, to 7. 7 people lost their lives to what the press had deemed the curse of Ötzi. Was this the mummy's revenge for rudely disturbing his slumber? Or was his spirit still under the impression that he was at war with a rival tribe? Maybe instead of wanting to hurt the people who had disturbed him, Ötzi was actually mistakenly trying to save the life of his wounded friend, and unaware that the battle he was fighting had ended thousands of years ago. It's obviously impossible to say. But the truth is that hundreds of people have been involved in researching Ötzi, and out of them, only 7 died during the spree of deaths believed to be connected to Ötzi's curse. Thanks to their collective work, we've been afforded a sneak peek into the lives of the people who have come before us. The average, everyday person desperately carving out an existence in some of our world's most uninhabitable frontiers. Thanks to their research, we know that Ötzi, surprisingly, likely came from the islands of Corsica or Sardinia, over 450 miles away from where he was eventually found. And we know that Ötzi lived a hard life. He was only 45 years old when that arrow cut him down. But already by then, Ötzi was a hardened and beaten man. He had heart disease. He had 4 cracked ribs. He had arthritis and worn out joints. He had parasites littered throughout his body and gallstones on top of that. His teeth were rotten and worn from eating hard food, and he had frostbite on his toes. On his right hand there was a cut between 2 fingers that went down to the bone that was only a few days old, which is believed to have been some sort of defensive wound that was acquired in a fight. Every day of Ötzi's life was painful, and yet he carried on fighting to survive until somebody else killed him. And his body, still almost perfectly preserved, tells us exactly how much Ötzi and his people wanted to live. He had over 60 tattoos on his skin, placed strategically on what we now know to be major lines in acupuncture. To this day, practitioners use needles to alleviate pain and heal organs in the exact same places that Ötzi repeatedly got tattoos himself. Ötzi and his peoples were practicing medicine, a medicine that wouldn't officially exist yet for thousands of years to come. What does this finding mean for our ancestors? Were the sides of our world and cultures in contact with each other far sooner than our history books tell us, or were we connected by some other, maybe even spiritual means? Perhaps Ötzi himself is still waiting for an answer. Maybe he's been trying to give it to us all this time and show us just how much is hidden beyond the grave. For now, he rests at the South Tyrol Archaeological Museum in Bolzano, Italy, where over 100,000 people a year come to visit him. To commemorate Ötzi and the mysterious information he has brought to us, a stone pyramid stands at the ridge where he was discovered. I think before we say anything about this, it is really important to point out that the people who lost their lives in this story, they're not just props in a scary story of a curse. Like, they were real people. They had families, they had hopes and dreams, and they deserve to be recognised as the people that they were, and as people whose lives were tragically cut short, and as people who were brilliant in their fields, you know, people who were journalists, who were, you know, rescuers, led teams of rescuers up in the mountains, people who were scientists, who brought all this information to us, and without them we wouldn't have any of this story. So they are not just props in a scary story. They are real people that had real families that really died. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, ooh, isn't it spooky that these people died for our scary story? We're not going to do that. Like I said in the end of this story, right? Hundreds of people have been involved in the extraction, the preservation and the study of Ötzi. And the hundreds of people didn't die, you know. And because so many people are involved in something, inevitably some people are going to die. That is going to happen. And the people who died in this instance, yes, their deaths were horrific and tragic, but they were also medical, you know, dying of injuries or illnesses, complications resulting from multiple sclerosis, from heart attacks, from a car accident. That does not mean that the spirit of Ötzi is absolutely wreaking havoc around the place. Absolutely not. If anything, I kind of feel like if I was Ötzi, which clearly I'm not, a prehistoric Iceman, wouldn't you think if the afterlife exists and somebody suddenly finds your body, wouldn't you think, oh my God, yeah, I lived on this mountain. I walked loads. I hunted. I battled other tribes with my friend. I did all this crazy shit. I survived 45 years in this really difficult life. And yeah, we tattooed. Yeah, we knew about acupuncture. We figured it out. We understood all that stuff. Yeah, we ate meat and fat and we ate cereals because we knew that was what was going to keep us alive. Yeah, my axe was made from Tuscan copper. Figure that one out. Like, talk about keeping your legacy alive for thousands of years. It just blows my mind. And when I was a kid, I used to be like obsessed with the story of Ötzi, right? And it blows my mind that this fella was just knocking around on the Alps thousands of years ago, going about his daily life, and then thousands of years later, here we are talking about what he ate for dinner. It's just amazing. I also had to look up the pronunciation of Ötzi because I always thought it was Otzi. It is not Otzi or Otzi. It is Ötzi. It's how you pronounce it. And yeah, I've probably pronounced it differently every single time I've said it in this episode because I just cannot get my head around it being Ötzi. But there we are. And there's that whole idea in life that you are alive as long as people remember you, as long as people talk about you, then you are alive and your legacy still lives on. How amazing for Ötzi that his legacy is still going. I'm still here making a podcast about him and talking about how he's able to curse people and kill people from beyond the grave, which I don't believe that he is. And I spoke about this film already this week, but I watched a film called A Ghost Story, which I spoke about, I think, on Friday's episode, maybe Wednesday's, I don't remember. But it's a film where a husband dies and he comes back as a ghost and watches life in his house as it continues. And there's a bit in the film where there's a house party and there's this sort of, you know, as there always is, there's an obnoxious man at this house party who's sort of waxing lyrical about things, and he's saying to people, you know, your kids are going to die and you're going to die and blah, blah, blah. And he's talking about, it's actually this really profound moment where he's talking about Beethoven's Ode to Joy, which is one of my favourite pieces of classical music anyway. And Beethoven wrote that piece of music for God. It was a dedication to God. And this man at this house party being really obnoxious is kind of saying, imagine if you're Beethoven, you found out that there is no God. There's nothing. There's no God. You've written this piece of music for nothing, for nobody. Then what are you writing it for? And the idea is that you're writing it for people, and the piece of music lives on in legacy, in people's memories, in people's psyche. And that's how you live forever. That's how you get eternal life, is, in 100 years time, 200 years time, whatever, 1,000 years time, people are still referencing this piece of music, even if it's only from memory, even if there's no physical copies of that piece of music left, even if it's just a generational memory, something that's there ingrained in your brain. If people are still referencing it and they're still talking about it, then it's kind of like eternal life, right? It's like living forever. That's your legacy and that's your eternity. This is all getting very unnecessarily profound. And I also wrote in my notes that I wonder, does it speak to our fear of death in some way and our reverence towards death? So we don't know what happens after we die, right? We can all have our individual beliefs about what happens after we die, but there's no definitive proof. So with stories like this, like Utsi and Tutankhamun, these curses, we seem to develop a fear of like, oh shit, like what if we've disturbed something ancient, and by taking these bodies from their final resting place, like what if we're doing something awful and therefore we're going to be punished? There's also this like mysticism of ancient people, and we feel like we're so far removed from them. So we don't understand these people. We don't understand how they lived and what they believed in. So we're like, were these people magical? Were they more in touch with the earth or with ancient spirits? And what are we risking by moving this body? Is that why people are dying? People who have been involved with this ancient body, is that why they're dying? Because these people were more at one with like the ancient spirits of the earth? Is it that kind of fear? And I'm going to be really frank, okay? Otzi's pretty scary looking. And I know that's not his fault, right? He is a mummy. He's been knocking around for thousands of years, frozen in ice. But he is quite scary looking. He's very shiny and very leathery, and he's obviously got no hair, and he's all sunken, and he's missing his top lip, and he is a bit scary looking. So I can understand why the wider public might have thought, oh, I feel like this man might have been cursed. I'm actually not going to post pictures of him on my Instagram or Facebook because I don't actually know if they will stay up. However, I can recommend that you go and look up pictures of Utsi the Iceman. He is a sight to behold and incredibly well preserved. Like, it is mad to think that his body is thousands of years old when you see how preserved he actually is. So in short, I don't believe in the curse of the Iceman, right? I don't believe in curses like this. I think that so many people are involved with stories like this in terms of, like I said, the preservation, the studying, etc., that people are bound to die. And when you've got this worldwide oddity, this phenomenon, this body that has survived thousands of years that is randomly found in the mountains, people are going to start attaching mysticism and magical thinking to it. I think it's a little bit inevitable, but I think this story is just mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to think about him trudging around up in the Alps thousands of years ago, and that, 6,000 years later, we're still talking about him to this day. Now that's a legacy. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share, you can send it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.